Blood sprayed across the frozen ground as Katherine Sawyer pressed her hand against the wound in her side, desperately trying to staunch the bleeding. Her feet were bare, torn and bleeding from hours of walking across the harsh winter landscape of Arizona Territory. The year was 1881, and she had nothing left but her tattered dress and the will to survive. Her boots had been taken, along with everything else she owned, by the same men who had murdered her father and left her for dead miles from the nearest settlement. The December wind howled across the barren landscape outside of Bisbee, Arizona, cutting through Katherine's thin dress like a knife. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably as she stumbled forward, each step sending shards of pain up her legs. The ground beneath her was hard as iron, crusted with frost from the unseasonably cold winter that had descended on the territory. Her toes had long ago lost all feeling, which she knew was a dangerous sign. "Just a little farther," she whispered to herself, her voice carried away by the wind. The distant silhouette of mountains told her she was heading in the right direction, but Bisbee still seemed impossibly far away. Katherine had been the daughter of a respected mine surveyor until 3 days ago. Now she was alone, freezing, and certain she would die if she didn't find help soon. The outlaws who had attacked their camp had taken everything: their horses, supplies, her father's maps, and even the boots from her feet. They had left her alive only by mistake, thinking the blow to her head had killed her. When she awoke beside her father's cold body, she had buried him with frozen hands before setting out toward civilization. That had been yesterday morning, and she had walked through the night, afraid to stop and rest lest the cold claim her completely. As the weak winter sun rose higher, Katherine's vision began to blur. The blood seeping through her fingers was warm against her frozen skin, and she knew she couldn't go much farther. Her steps became unsteady, her breathing labored. The pain in her bare feet had subsided to a dangerous numbness. In the distance, a cloud of dust rose against the horizon. Katherine blinked, uncertain if her mind was playing tricks on her. But the dust cloud grew larger, resolving into the shape of a rider moving fast across the landscape. Katherine tried to call out, but her parched throat produced only a rasping sound. She waved one bloodied hand weakly, praying the approaching rider would see her. Yates Irving had been tracking the Sutton gang for 2 weeks. As the newest deputy marshal in the Arizona Territory, he had been given the thankless task of bringing in the notorious outlaws who had been terrorizing mining operations across the territory. His superior had little faith that the 26-year-old would succeed where others had failed, but Yates was determined to prove himself. He had picked up their trail outside of Tucson and followed it relentlessly, despite losing it several times. Now, as he rode through the frozen landscape toward Bisbee, he was certain he was close. The gang had been spotted near the border, and he intended to cut them off before they could escape into Mexico. The winter had been unusually harsh, turning the normally arid landscape into a treacherous expanse of frozen ground. His horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Copper, picked his way carefully across the terrain as Yates scanned the horizon. Something caught his eye, a flash of movement where there should be none. Squinting against the glare of the sun on frost, he made out a figure stumbling across the barren ground. "What in tarnation?" he muttered, turning Copper toward the distant shape. As he drew closer, the figure resolved into a woman, her dress torn and bloodied, her feet bare against the frozen earth. Yates spurred Copper forward, covering the distance between them in moments. "Madam," he called out as he reined in his horse. "Madam, are you all right?" Katherine looked up at the sound of a man's voice, hope flaring in her chest even as her legs finally gave out beneath her. She crumpled to the ground, the frozen earth harsh against her knees. Yates dismounted in one fluid motion, rushing to the woman's side. He took in her condition with a glance, the blood staining her side, her battered feet, the exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Miss, what happened to you?" he asked, crouching beside her. "Ambushed," Katherine managed to whisper through cracked lips. "My father, killed. Men took everything, our boots, supplies." She shuddered, clutching her side. "Need to reach Bisbee." Yates cursed under his breath. "The Sutton gang," he said grimly, "had to be them." He looked at her bare, bloodied feet and made a swift decision. "You can't walk another step like this," he said firmly. Pulling off his own well-worn boots, sturdy leather that had seen him through many a long ride, he set them before her. "These will be too big, but they'll protect your feet better than nothing." Katherine stared at him in disbelief. "Your boots? But my socks are thick, and I've got my horse," he said, cutting off her protest. "You need these more than I do right now." Before she could argue further, he helped her slip her swollen, battered feet into his boots. They were indeed much too large, but the relief of having something between her feet and the frozen ground was immediate. "Thank you," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. Yates nodded, then turned his attention to the wound in her side. Gently moving her hand aside, he examined the injury. "Not too deep," he said with relief, "but it needs tending." He retrieved a flask of whiskey from his saddlebag, using some to clean the wound before binding it with a clean bandana. "What's your name, miss?" he asked as he worked. "Katherine Sawyer," she replied, wincing as he tightened the makeshift bandage. "My father was James Sawyer, the mine surveyor." Yates nodded in recognition. "I heard about a surveyor working the new claims south of here. I'm Deputy Marshal Yates Irving." He finished tending her wound and looked at her critically. "Bisbee is still a good 10 miles from here, Miss Sawyer. You're in no condition to walk that far, even with boots." Katherine's heart sank. She had come so far, endured so much, to fail now seemed unbearable. "I have to try," she said, attempting to rise to her feet. Her legs betrayed her, buckling beneath her weight. Yates caught her before she could fall. Without hesitation, he swept her into his arms. "You're not walking anywhere, Miss Sawyer. I'll carry you to my horse." Katherine wanted to protest, but the strength had finally left her body. She found herself cradled against the deputy marshal's chest, his heartbeat steady under her ear. "I can't impose," she whispered weakly. "Your pursuit, the gang will keep," Yates said firmly, carrying her to where Copper waited patiently. "Getting you to safety comes first." With careful movements, he lifted her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. One strong arm wrapped around her waist to hold her steady as he took up the reins with his other hand. "Lean back against me," he instructed. "Try to rest. I'll get you to town." Katherine found herself unable to resist, her body too battered and exhausted to maintain its rigid posture. She leaned back against the solid warmth of the deputy marshal's chest, feeling oddly safe despite her circumstances. Yates urged Copper forward at a gentle pace, mindful of the injured woman in his arms. The trail to Bisbee would take hours, and he would have to be careful not to jostle her wounds. As they rode, Katherine drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally startling awake with a gasp only to feel Yates's arm tighten reassuringly around her. "Easy now," he murmured each time. "I've got you. You're safe." Despite the cold air, his body heat kept her from freezing, and the steady rhythm of the horse's gait lulled her back into a doze. In her half-conscious state, she wondered at the strange turn her fortune had taken from certain death to being carried across the wilderness by a man who had given her his very boots. The sun was beginning to sink toward the western horizon when they finally caught sight of Bisbee. The mining town sprawled across a narrow valley, smoke rising from chimneys against the backdrop of the Mule Mountains. To Katherine, it looked like salvation. "Almost there," Yates said, his voice a comforting rumble against her back. "Just hold on a little longer." The town had grown rapidly since the discovery of copper deposits, and the main street was busy despite the cold. Heads turned as Yates rode in with Katherine cradled against him. He made straight for Doc Sullivan's office near the center of town. "Doc," Yates called as he reined in copper outside the weathered building that served as both the doctor's office and home. The door opened almost immediately, revealing a gray-haired man with spectacles perched on his nose. He took one look at Yates and the woman in his arms and gestured them inside. "Bring her in, deputy," he said, already rolling up his sleeves. "What happened?" "Sutton gang, I reckon," Yates explained as he carried Katherine inside, his stockinged feet padding silently across the wooden floor. "Found her walking barefoot on frozen ground outside of town. She's got a knife wound to her side and her feet are in bad shape." Doc Sullivan nodded grimly, directing Yates to place Katherine on the examination table. "Those bastards have been causing trouble all across the territory. This the surveyor's daughter?" "Yes," Katherine confirmed weakly. "James Sawyer was my father." The doctor's expression softened with sympathy. "I heard about your father's expedition, had no idea you were with him." He turned to Yates. "I'll take care of her now, deputy. You should get some proper footwear before your own feet freeze." Yates hesitated, reluctant to leave Katherine now that he had brought her to safety. "I'll be back to check on her," he said, looking at Katherine's pale face. "Don't worry, Miss Sawyer. You're in good hands now." Katherine caught his hand before he could turn away. "Thank you," she whispered. "I would have died out there if not for you." Yates squeezed her hand gently. "Just doing my duty, Miss Sawyer. Rest now." As he left the doctor's office, Yates was struck by a strange reluctance to be parted from the brave woman he had rescued. In his years as a lawman, he had seen many tragedies, but something about Katherine Sawyer's determination to survive against all odds had touched him deeply. He made his way to the general store, procuring a new pair of boots before heading to the sheriff's office to report what had happened. Sheriff Miller was a grizzled veteran of the frontier, his face weathered by years under the Arizona sun. "So the Sutton gangs moved on to murdering surveyors now," the sheriff growled after Yates had related Katherine's story. "And you say they took his maps?" Yates nodded. "That's what Miss Sawyer indicated. They must be planning something big if they're interested in survey maps." "The new silver deposit," Sheriff Miller said thoughtfully. "That's what they're after. Sawyer was mapping the area around the MacDonald claim, and word is they've hit a rich vein." He studied Yates with sharp eyes. "You were tracking them before you found the girl. You planning to continue?" Yates hesitated. The logical course would be to resume his pursuit immediately while the trail was still fresh. But the thought of leaving Katherine alone in Bisbee, injured and grieving, troubled him. "I need to make sure Miss Sawyer recovers first," he said finally. "She has no one else, and she may know something that could help us catch the gang." Sheriff Miller raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "Doc Sullivan will take good care of her. You can stay at the boarding house while you're in town." He pulled out a sheet of paper and began writing. "I'll send a wire to Tucson, let them know what's happened." Yates thanked him and left, returning to Doc Sullivan's to check on Katherine. He found her sleeping, her face peaceful despite the ordeal she had endured. The doctor was washing his hands in a basin nearby. "How is she?" Yates asked quietly. "Lucky to be alive," Doc Sullivan replied. "The knife wound isn't too serious, but she lost a fair amount of blood. Her feet are badly frostbitten, but I think she'll keep all her toes. It's a miracle she made it as far as she did." He dried his hands on a towel, looking at Yates curiously. "Not many men would give up their boots in the middle of nowhere, deputy." Yates shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Couldn't let her keep walking barefoot. The doctor hummed, a knowing look in his eyes. She'll need to stay here for a few days at least. After that, she'll need somewhere to recuperate. Does she have family in town? None that I know of, Yates replied, his brow furrowing. Her father was all she had, from what she said. Then we'll have to find arrangements for her, Doc Sullivan said. Mrs. Holloway at the boarding house might take her in. Yates nodded, his gaze returning to Katherine's sleeping form. I'll cover her expenses, he said firmly. The doctor raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. She's likely to sleep through the night. You should get some rest yourself, Deputy. You look dead on your feet. Reluctantly, Yates left Katherine in the doctor's care and made his way to the boarding house. Mrs. Holloway, a widow who ran the establishment with military efficiency, showed him to a small but clean room on the second floor. The doctor sent word about that poor girl you rescued, she said as she handed him a key. Terrible business. Is it true you gave her your boots and carried her all the way to town? News traveled fast in Bisbee. Yates nodded uncomfortably, not wanting to make more of his actions than they warranted. Just did what anyone would do, madam. Mrs. Holloway smiled knowingly. Not just anyone, Deputy Irving. Not just anyone. Left alone in his room, Yates removed his new boots and stretched out on the narrow bed, intending only to rest for a moment before going back to check on Katherine. Instead, the exhaustion of the past days caught up with him, and he fell into a deep sleep. He dreamed of Katherine walking barefoot across an endless expanse of frozen ground, always just beyond his reach no matter how fast he ran toward her. When he awoke, sunlight was streaming through the window. Yates sat up with a jolt, realizing he had slept through the night. Quickly pulling on his boots, he hurried to Doc Sullivan's office. He found Katherine awake, sitting up in bed with her bandaged feet carefully elevated on a pillow. Some color had returned to her cheeks, and her auburn hair had been neatly combed and braided. Even pale and injured, she was striking something he hadn't fully appreciated during their desperate journey to town. Her eyes brightened when she saw him. Deputy Irving, she greeted him, her voice stronger than the day before. Miss Sawyer, he replied, removing his hat as he approached her bedside. It's good to see you looking better. Thanks to you, she said softly. Doc Sullivan says I wouldn't have survived another hour out there in that cold. Yates shifted uncomfortably under her grateful gaze. I'm just glad I found you when I did. He pulled up a chair beside her bed. How are your feet? Painful, she admitted with a slight grimace. But the doctor says I should recover completely given time. Her expression sobered. He also told me that you're tracking the men who killed my father. Yates nodded. The Sutton gang. They've been raiding throughout the territory for months. I've been on their trail for 2 weeks. Katherine's hands tightened on the blanket covering her lap. I want them brought to justice, she said, her voice suddenly hard. They murdered my father in cold blood. He offered them everything we had, but they killed him anyway, just for sport. I promise you, Miss Sawyer, they'll pay for what they've done, Yates said solemnly. Can you tell me anything that might help me find them? Anything about where they were headed or what they said? Katherine closed her eyes briefly, visibly gathering her strength before recounting the attack. There were 5 of them. The leader was a tall man with a scar across his cheek. They seemed very interested in my father's maps of the MacDonald claim. Did they say why? Yates pressed gently. They mentioned something about a big score, Katherine replied. One of them said it would be their last job before heading to Mexico. She hesitated. There was something else. They talked about meeting someone at Rattlesnake Canyon in 3 days' time. Someone who would pay well for the maps. Her eyes met Yates's. That would be tomorrow. Yates leaned forward, excitement kindling within him. This was the break he needed. Rattlesnake Canyon is less than a day's ride from here. If I leave now, I could intercept them before the meeting." "You can't go alone," Katherine protested, reaching out to grasp his arm. "There are 5 of them and they're killers." "It's my job, Miss Sawyer," Yates said gently. "And I won't be alone. I'll speak with Sheriff Miller, see if he can spare a deputy or 2. Katherine's grip on his arm tightened. "Please be careful," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't bear it if," she broke off, color rising in her cheeks. Something shifted between them in that moment, a connection forming that went beyond rescuer and rescued. Yates covered her hand with his own. "I'll be careful," he promised, "and I'll come back to check on you as soon as I return." Doc Sullivan entered the room then, carrying a tray with breakfast for Katherine. "Ah, Deputy," he greeted Yates. "I was wondering when you'd turn up. My patient here has been asking after you." Katherine blushed deeper, withdrawing her hand from Yates's arm. "I was merely concerned about the man who saved my life, Doctor." The doctor's eyes twinkled with amusement as he set the tray beside her. "Of course, Miss Sawyer. Very natural." He turned to Yates. "Sheriff Miller was looking for you earlier, said he had news about those outlaws you're after." Yates rose reluctantly. "I should go see him then. Miss Sawyer, I'll return before I leave town." Katherine nodded, her eyes following him as he left the room. The connection between them lingered, a tangible thing that both confused and intrigued her. She had never felt such an immediate bond with anyone before. "He's a good man, that deputy," Doc Sullivan commented as he checked her bandages. "Not many would have done what he did for you." "I know," Katherine said softly. "I owe him my life." The doctor smiled knowingly. "From the way he looks at you, I'd say he considers it a fair exchange." Katherine felt warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with her recovering health. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on eating the breakfast the doctor had brought. She needed to regain her strength, especially if, though she hardly dared admit it to herself, she wanted to be worthy of the brave deputy who had carried her through the wilderness. Yates found Sheriff Miller in his office, studying a map spread across his desk. The sheriff looked up as he entered, his expression grim. "Irving, good timing. Just got a wire from Tucson. The Sutton gang hit a stagecoach yesterday, killed the driver and guard. They're getting bolder." Yates's jaw tightened. "Miss Sawyer gave me information." "They're meeting someone at Rattlesnake Canyon tomorrow, planning to sell the survey maps they took from her father." Sheriff Miller's bushy eyebrows shot up. "That's solid intelligence. If we move fast, we could catch them all at once." He pointed to the map. "Rattlesnake Canyon is here, about 15 miles southeast. Tricky terrain." "I know it," Yates confirmed. "We'd need to approach carefully, set up positions before they arrive." The sheriff nodded. "I can spare 2 deputies. Johnson and Reeves are good men in a fight." He studied Yates thoughtfully. "This is your case, Irving. You'll lead." The responsibility settled on Yates's shoulders. This would be his first command since being appointed deputy marshal. He knew the risks. The Sutton gang was notorious for its violence, but he also thought of Katherine and the justice she deserved. "We'll leave at first light tomorrow," he decided. "That gives us time to prepare and position ourselves before they arrive." Sheriff Miller agreed, and they spent the next hour planning the operation. When they had hammered out the details, Yates left to make his preparations, stopping first at the telegraph office to send a message to his superior in Tucson. As promised, he returned to check on Katherine before making his final preparations. He found her sitting in a chair by the window, her bandaged feet resting on a stool. She had been given a borrowed dress to replace her tattered one, and her hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders. The sight of her stirred something in his chest that he wasn't quite ready to examine. "Deputy Irving," she greeted him, her face lighting up. "I was hoping you'd come back." I said I would, he replied, taking off his hat as he entered the room. How are you feeling? Much better, she said. Doc Sullivan says I'm recovering well. He's arranged for me to stay with Mrs. Holloway at the boarding house starting tomorrow. Yates nodded. Mrs. Holloway will take good care of you. She's a kind woman, if a bit forthright. Katherine smiled. So I've heard. Her expression grew serious. Will you be leaving to find those men? At dawn tomorrow, Yates confirmed. Sheriff Miller and 2 deputies will be coming with me. We have a good plan. He hesitated, then added, I wanted you to know in case you were worried. I am worried, Katherine admitted softly. These men are dangerous, Deputy. They killed my father without hesitation. I've dealt with their kind before, Yates assured her. We'll be careful, and we have the advantage of surprise. He hesitated, then asked, Is there anyone I should notify about your situation? Any family elsewhere who should know what's happened? Katherine shook her head, sadness filling her eyes. There's no one. My mother died when I was a child, and my father was all I had left. We've been traveling from one mining town to another for years, following the work. She looked down at her hands. I don't even know what I'll do once I've recovered. I have no money, no possessions. You don't need to worry about that right now, Yates said firmly. Bisbee looks after its own, and for now you're one of us. Once you're well, there will be options. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. I almost forgot. I found this in my saddlebag. It's not much, but it might help. He placed the pouch in her hands. Katherine opened it to find a small silver pendant on a chain, a simple design of a star within a circle. It was my mother's, Yates explained. She gave it to me before she passed, said it would protect me. I've carried it for luck ever since. He looked slightly embarrassed. I thought you might like to borrow it, for protection while I'm gone. Katherine's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at him. I can't take this. It's too precious. You're not taking it, Yates corrected gently. You're keeping it safe until I return. He took the necklace from her hands and, with her permission, fastened it around her neck. His fingers brushed against her skin, causing a shiver to run through her that had nothing to do with cold. The pendant settled just above her heart, warm against her skin. I'll guard it with my life, she promised. Yates smiled, and for a moment neither spoke, caught in a moment of connection that transcended words. Finally, he stepped back, replacing his hat. I should go. There's much to prepare before tomorrow. He moved toward the door, then paused. Miss Sawyer, Katherine, I will come back. You have my word. I'll hold you to that, Deputy Irving, she replied, her hand resting on the pendant. I'll be waiting. With that promise between them, Yates left to prepare for the confrontation with the Sutton gang. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity, checking weapons, provisioning horses, reviewing plans with Sheriff Miller and the deputies who would accompany him. Through it all, thoughts of Katherine lingered at the edges of his mind. Her courage in the face of tragedy, her resilience despite her injuries, the way her eyes had brightened when he entered the room. He found himself looking forward to returning to Bisbee for reasons beyond his duty as a lawman. As dawn broke the next day, 4 riders set out from Bisbee, heading southeast toward Rattlesnake Canyon. Yates led the way, his thoughts divided between the task ahead and the woman he had left behind. He touched the empty spot where his mother's pendant usually hung, hoping it would bring Katherine the same protection it had always afforded him. Katherine, meanwhile, was moved to the boarding house under Mrs. Holloway's watchful eye. The older woman fussed over her, ensuring she was comfortable in a small but tidy room on the ground floor. Deputy Irving arranged everything, Mrs. Holloway explained as she helped Katherine settle in. Paid for 2 weeks in advance, he did, and made me promise to send for the doctor at the slightest concern. Katherine felt a warmth spread through her at this evidence of Yates's thoughtfulness. "He's very kind," she murmured. Mrs. Holloway gave her a knowing look. "He's never done anything like this before, not in all the time he's been coming through Bisbee. You must have made quite an impression on him, Miss Sawyer." Katherine blushed, her hand automatically rising to touch the pendant at her throat. "He saved my life. I suppose that creates a certain connection." "Indeed it does," the older woman agreed with a smile. "Now you rest. Doctor's orders. I'll bring you some lunch in a while." Left alone, Katherine found her thoughts turning constantly to Yates. Was he safe? Had he reached Rattlesnake Canyon? Was he at that very moment confronting the men who had murdered her father? The uncertainty was nearly unbearable. To distract herself, she asked Mrs. Holloway for something to read. The woman brought her several old newspapers and a dog-eared copy of The Last of the Mohicans. Katherine tried to lose herself in the story, but her mind kept wandering back to the reality of her situation. She was alone in the world now, without family or resources. Once she recovered, she would need to find a way to support herself. The thought was daunting, but Katherine had never been one to surrender to circumstances. Her father had raised her to be independent and resourceful, skills that would serve her well now. As night fell with no word from the posse, Katherine's anxiety grew. Mrs. Holloway brought her dinner and tried to reassure her. "These things take time, dear," the older woman said kindly. "Rattlesnake Canyon is a fair distance, and they'll be moving carefully. No news is good news in situations like this." Katherine nodded, but sleep eluded her that night. She lay awake, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling around her, her fingers wrapped around Yates's pendant as if it could somehow connect her to him across the miles. Morning came with still no news. Katherine persuaded Mrs. Holloway to help her to the window, where she could watch the main street of Bisbee. Her feet were healing, but walking was still painful. She spent most of the day there, scanning the horizon for any sign of returning riders. It was late afternoon when she finally spotted a cloud of dust in the distance. Heart pounding, she watched as riders came into view, 4 of them, moving at a steady pace. Relief flooded through her at the sight. "They're back," she called to Mrs. Holloway. "4 riders just as left, Mrs." Holloway hurried to help her back to bed. "You shouldn't excite yourself, Miss Sawyer. Your recovery—" "I'm fine," Katherine insisted. "Please, could you go find out what happened, if they caught the men who killed my father?" The older woman hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, but you must promise to rest while I'm gone." Katherine agreed, though rest was the furthest thing from her mind. She waited impatiently, straining to hear any sounds from the street that might indicate what was happening. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was likely only 20 minutes, Mrs. Holloway returned. Her expression was hard to read. "Well," Katherine demanded, "what happened? Is Deputy Irving all right?" "The deputy is fine," Mrs. Holloway assured her. "They caught 3 of the gang members, including the leader, a man named Sutton. 2 others escaped, but they were apparently just hired guns, not the main culprits." Relief washed over Katherine. "And the maps, my father's maps, recovered along with other stolen property," Mrs. Holloway confirmed. "Deputy Irving asked after you, said he would come by as soon as he had delivered the prisoners to the jail." Katherine's heart leapt at the news. "Thank you for telling me," she said, trying to keep her voice even despite her excitement. Mrs. Holloway gave her a knowing smile before leaving her alone with her thoughts. It was nearly sundown when a knock came at her door. Katherine had spent the time making herself as presentable as possible, combing her hair and arranging the borrowed dress as neatly as she could. "Come in," she called, her heart racing. The door opened to reveal Yates Irving. He looked tired, with a day's worth of stubble darkening his jaw and dust covering his clothes. but he was whole and unharmed. His eyes lit up at the sight of her, a smile breaking across his face. "Miss Sawyer," he greeted her, removing his hat as he entered. "You're looking well." "As are you, Deputy," she replied, unable to keep the relief from her voice. "Mrs. Holloway told me you were successful." Yates nodded, pulling a chair close to her bed and sitting down. "We were. Caught Sutton and 2 of his men. The other 2 fled, but they weren't the ones responsible for your father's death." His expression softened. "We recovered your father's maps and some of your personal belongings. They're at the sheriff's office. I'll bring them to you tomorrow once they've been properly documented." "Thank you," Katherine said softly, "for everything. Did the men say why they wanted the maps so badly?" "Sutton talked plenty once he realized how much trouble he was in," Yates confirmed. "Your father had mapped a new silver deposit on the MacDonald claim, a rich one. Sutton was planning to jump the claim, using your father's maps to locate the exact spot. He had a buyer lined up for the silver they planned to steal." He leaned forward. "The good news is that the claim's still secure, and the mine owner, MacDonald, is mighty grateful for the return of those maps. He's offering a reward." Katherine blinked in surprise. "A reward for me?" Yates nodded. "For the recovery of the maps. Sheriff Miller made sure he knew they were your father's, and that you're his sole heir. MacDonald's a fair man. He says the maps rightfully belong to you now, and he's willing to pay handsomely to use them for his mining operation." Hope bloomed in Katherine's chest. "So I won't be destitute after all," she murmured. "Far from it," Yates assured her. "The amount he's offering would set you up comfortably wherever you choose to go." He hesitated, then added, "Though I hope you might consider staying in Bisbee at least for a while." The implication behind his words was clear, and Katherine felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with her recovery. "I think I might," she said softly. "I've found the people here to be remarkably kind." Yates's gaze held hers, a connection forming between them that transcended words. Finally, he remembered the pendant and reached to remove it from around her neck. "I should return this to you," Katherine said, her fingers brushing his as she helped unfasten the clasp. "It brought me luck," Yates said with a smile. "We caught the gang without firing a single shot. They were so surprised by our approach that they surrendered immediately." "I'm glad," Katherine replied. "I don't think I could have borne it if you'd been hurt on my account." The pendant now safely back in his possession, Yates hesitated before standing. "I should let you rest," he said reluctantly. "Dr. Sullivan would have my hide if he knew I was keeping you from your recovery." "Will you come back tomorrow?" Katherine asked, not wanting him to leave just yet. "With your belongings," he promised. "And perhaps, if you're feeling up to it, we could discuss your plans for the future. Bisbee's growing rapidly, and there are opportunities for someone with your education and background." Katherine smiled, touched by his consideration. "I'd like that very much, Deputy Irving." "Yates," he corrected her gently. "I think we've moved beyond formalities, don't you?" "Yates," she repeated, liking the way his name felt on her lips. "And you must call me Katherine." "Katherine," he echoed, the name sounding like a caress in his deep voice. "Rest well. I'll see you tomorrow." With that, he left, but the warmth of his presence lingered long after the door closed behind him. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm of healing and growing connection. True to his word, Yates visited Katherine daily, bringing not only her recovered possessions but also news of the town, books to read, and occasionally small treats from the bakery. As her strength returned, they began taking short walks together, Yates's supportive arm always ready when her still healing feet tired. Bisbee embraced Katherine as one of its own, particularly after the story of her ordeal and Yates's rescue spread throughout the town. The mine owner, MacDonald, proved as good as his word, paying her a generous sum for her father's maps and offering his condolences for her loss. With her new financial security, Katherine rented a small house on the outskirts of town and began considering her options for the future. She had assisted her father with his work for years and had a good understanding of surveying principles. Several mine owners, impressed by her knowledge, approached her about continuing her father's work. Throughout it all, her relationship with Yates deepened. What had begun as gratitude evolved into friendship, and friendship blossomed into something more profound. Their walks grew longer, their conversations deeper, and the moments of silence between them more comfortable. One evening in early February, nearly 2 months after he had found her walking barefoot across the frozen ground, Yates invited Katherine to dinner at the town's best restaurant, a special occasion to celebrate her full recovery. She wore a new dress for the occasion, one she had ordered from Tucson with some of her reward money. The deep green color complemented her auburn hair and brought out the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. When Yates arrived to escort her, the appreciation in his gaze made her blush. "You look beautiful, Katherine," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, accepting his arm. "You clean up rather well yourself, Deputy." Indeed, Yates had made an effort for the evening, wearing a new suit rather than his usual deputy's attire, his dark hair neatly combed. As they walked to the restaurant, heads turned to watch them pass, and Katherine realized they had become something of a story in Bisbee, the barefoot survivor, and the deputy who had carried her to safety. The restaurant had reserved the best table for them, and as they settled in, Katherine couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come since that desperate day in December. "A penny for your thoughts," Yates said, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was just thinking about how differently things might have turned out if you hadn't found me that day," she replied honestly. "I would have died out there alone." Yates reached across the table to take her hand. "But I did find you. Perhaps it was fate." "Do you believe in fate, Yates?" she asked curiously. He considered the question seriously before answering. "I believe that sometimes life puts us exactly where we need to be, even if we don't understand the reason at the time." His thumb traced patterns on the back of her hand. "I was tracking the Sutton gang for weeks without success. Then suddenly there you were in the middle of nowhere with the very information I needed to catch them." "A fortunate coincidence," Katherine murmured. "Perhaps," Yates agreed, "or perhaps something more." His eyes held hers, earnest and warm. "I've never been one for flowery words, Katherine, but these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, seeing your strength and determination, it's made me realize what I want for my future." Katherine's heart quickened at the intensity in his gaze. "And what do you want, Yates?" he said simply. "By my side if you'll have me." The directness of his declaration took her breath away. "Yates, are you asking you to marry me?" he finished for her, a smile tugging at his lips. "Yes, I believe I am. Rather bluntly, I'm afraid." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know it hasn't been long, and if you need time to consider—" "Yes," Katherine interrupted, her heart too full to let him doubt her answer for even a moment. "Yes, I'll marry you, Yates." Joy transformed his face, erasing the worry lines that had creased his brow. "You're certain?" "I'm still a deputy marshal, Katherine. It's not always an easy life for a wife." "I'm certain," she assured him. "After everything we've been through, I can't imagine a future without you in it." She smiled, her eyes shining with happiness. "Besides, I've already seen you at your worst in stockinged feet in the middle of winter, carrying a half-dead woman across the wilderness." Yates laughed, the sound rich and full. "And you at yours, though even then, I thought you were the bravest, most beautiful woman I'd ever seen." The waiter arrived with their meals then, interrupting the moment, but nothing could diminish the joy that filled them both. Throughout dinner, they talked of their future, where they would live, what Katherine would do with her surveying skills, how Yates's duties might change now that he was to be a married man. "I've been offered a position as sheriff in Bisbee," he revealed as they finished their dessert. "Sheriff Miller is retiring at the end of the month and recommended me as his replacement. It would mean less traveling, more stable hours." "Would you be happy with that?" Katherine asked, knowing how much he valued his work as a deputy marshal. Yates nodded thoughtfully. "I think I would. Especially now with you to come home to." He smiled. "And Bisbee is growing. There's plenty of work for a sheriff here, keeping the peace as the town expands." "Then I think it sounds perfect," Katherine said warmly. "And I could continue my father's work, perhaps open an office in town for surveying and map-making." As they walked home under a canopy of stars, Yates's arm around her waist, Katherine marveled at the turn her life had taken. From the depths of tragedy and near death, she had found not only safety and security, but also a love she had never dared hope for. At her door, Yates kissed her for the first time, a gentle, questioning press of his lips against hers that deepened when she responded. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Katherine Sawyer," he whispered. "From the moment I saw you walking barefoot across that frozen ground, something in me recognized you as the one I'd been waiting for all my life." "I love you too," she replied, her heart full to bursting. "My rescuer, my protector, my future." They were married in the spring, when wildflowers carpeted the hills around Bisbee and the harsh winter was nothing but a distant memory. The entire town turned out for the celebration, eager to witness the culmination of a love story that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances. Katherine wore her mother's wedding dress, which had been among the possessions recovered from the Sutton gang. Yates wore his new sheriff's badge proudly, having accepted the position shortly after their engagement. As they exchanged vows under an arch of desert blooms, Katherine couldn't help but think of her father. He would have approved of Yates. She knew would have admired his courage, his integrity, his unwavering devotion to duty and to her. "I wish my father could be here," she whispered to Yates as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. "He is, in a way," Yates replied, holding her close. "In you, in the strength and courage he instilled in you, the strength that kept you walking across that frozen ground when most would have given up." Katherine smiled through tears, knowing he was right. "And in us, in the future we'll build together." That future unfolded with the changing seasons, each day deepening their bond. Yates proved to be a respected and capable sheriff, bringing a steady hand to Bisbee's governance as the mining town continued to grow. Katherine established herself as a skilled surveyor in her own right, her maps and plans sought after by mine owners throughout the territory. They made their home in a sturdy house on the edge of town, with a view of the mountains where they had first met. In the winter, when frost sometimes painted the ground white, Yates would often tease Katherine about her penchant for going barefoot around the house. "Haven't you had enough of bare feet on cold ground?" he would ask, offering her slippers. "I have excellent memories associated with being barefoot," she would reply with a mischievous smile. "A handsome deputy giving me his boots and carrying me to safety." "Well, I'm still prepared to carry you anywhere you need to go," Yates would declare, sweeping her into his arms to prove his point. A year after their wedding, Katherine gave birth to their first child, a son they named James, after her father. He had Yates's dark hair and Katherine's hazel eyes, a perfect blend of them both. Watching Yates cradle their newborn son with gentle hands, Katherine felt a completeness she had never known possible. "He's perfect," Yates whispered, awe evident in his voice. Perfect, just like his mother. He has a wonderful legacy to live up to, Katherine replied, touching her son's tiny hand. The courage of his grandfather, the integrity of his father, and the determination of his mother, Yates added with a smile. Heaven help us, when he learns to walk, he'll be unstoppable. Life in Bisbee settled into a rhythm of work and family, challenges and joys. The Sutton gang became a distant memory as Katherine and Yates built their life together. 2 years after James's birth, they welcomed a daughter, whom they named Elizabeth after Yates's mother. The Arizona Territory grew and changed around them, eventually achieving statehood in 1912. By then, Yates had become mayor of Bisbee, respected for his fair-minded leadership and unwavering principles. Katherine's surveying business had expanded to include cartography for the entire region, her maps renowned for their accuracy and detail. Through it all, their love remained constant, deepening with shared experiences and the passing years. On cold winter mornings, Yates would often wrap Katherine in his arms and remind her of the day they met. "Best day of my life," he would murmur against her hair. "Finding you out there, giving you my boots, carrying you to safety." "Mine too," Katherine would reply, despite the circumstances that had led to their meeting. "You saved more than my life that day, Yates. You saved my heart." On their 20th wedding anniversary, with their children nearly grown, Yates surprised Katherine with a special gift, a small silver pendant, identical to the one his mother had given him. "I had it made in Tucson," he explained as he fastened it around her neck. "So you'd always have your own, a reminder of how we began." Katherine touched the pendant, tears welling in her eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered, "just like the life we've built together." Later that evening, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the frozen ground where she had walked barefoot and desperate, to the warm comfort of a life filled with love and purpose, it seemed almost miraculous. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, his hand finding hers as it had countless times over the years. "About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best," she replied. "If my father hadn't been killed, if I hadn't been left to die in the wilderness, we might never have met." Yates squeezed her hand. "I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some connections are meant to be, no matter the circumstances." Katherine leaned against his shoulder, content in the certainty of his love. "I think you're right. Some things are simply destined." As the last light faded from the sky and stars began to emerge, Katherine and Yates remained on the porch, hands entwined, hearts beating as one. The young woman who had once walked barefoot across frozen ground had found not only safety but a love that would warm her for all the days of her life. And the cowboy who had given her his boots and carried her to safety had found the other half of his soul. Together, they had built a life richer and more beautiful than either could have imagined, proving that even in the harsh landscape of the Wild West, love could take root and flourish, transforming lives and healing wounds in ways that seemed nothing short of miraculous. And in the years that followed, as their children grew and began families of their own, as Bisbee continued to thrive under Yates's leadership, and as Katherine's maps guided a new generation of pioneers, the story of the barefoot woman and the cowboy who saved her became legend in the town, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and love to overcome even the most desperate circumstances. For Katherine and Yates, however, it was simply their story, the foundation of a lifetime shared, a love born in adversity and strengthened through years of joy and challenge, as enduring as the mountains that had witnessed their beginning and as deep as the bond that had formed the moment a deputy marshal had given a barefoot woman his boots and carried her to safety.